My brother looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You've been a burden on this family your whole life. We don't need you here anymore." I didn't say a word. I just nodded, picked up my coffee mug, the one I'd bought myself 6 years ago when I first moved back home to help him run the business, and I walked upstairs to pack. He had no idea what was about to unravel. Let me back up. Our dad passed when I was 23. Heart attack, sudden, no warning. My brother was 31 at the time, already married, already comfortable. Dad left behind a small auto parts wholesale business he'd been running out of Mississauga for almost 20 years. Nothing glamorous, but steady. Suppliers in Hamilton, clients across the GTA, a warehouse lease on Dixie Road, a small team of 6 guys who'd been with him for years. The problem was the business was a mess. Dad was brilliant with relationships. Every supplier trusted him, every client liked him, but the books were a disaster. He'd been running things on handshakes and gut instinct for 2 decades. No proper accounting software. Receivables spread across sticky notes and a binder. HST filings done once a year in a panic. A line of credit he'd been quietly drawing on for 18 months, just to cover payroll. My brother didn't know any of this. He'd never been involved in the business. He worked in commercial real estate downtown, wore nice suits, took clients to Canucks games when he traveled to Vancouver for deals. He was the successful one. I was the one who'd taken a job at the warehouse right out of college, because I didn't know what else to do. Because I wanted to stay close to Dad, because someone had to. So when Dad died, I knew exactly what we were inheriting. I didn't tell my brother right away. Not because I wanted to hide it. I just needed a few weeks to understand the full picture before I set anything on fire. I hired an accountant out of my own pocket, a woman named Anne who worked out of a small office in Brampton. She spent 3 weeks going through everything and then sat across from me at a Tim Hortons on Airport Road and said, "Your family's business is about 90 days from insolvency." 90 days. The line of credit was maxed. The warehouse lease had a clause Dad had never flagged. A rent escalation that had kicked in the previous January, bumping monthly payments by almost 40%. 2 major clients had receivables sitting at over 120 days with no follow-up. The CRA had sent 2 letters about HST discrepancies that nobody had opened. I paid Anne out of my savings. I asked her to help me fix it. She agreed, on a payment plan I could actually manage. What happened over the next 14 months, I don't think I've ever fully explained to anyone. Not completely. I renegotiated the warehouse lease. The landlord was difficult, a property management company out of Vaughan, but I sat across from their representative for 2 hours, and I showed him exactly what we could sustain and what we couldn't, and I told him we'd vacate immediately if he didn't work with us. He gave us a 6-month rent deferral and restructured the escalation clause. I drove home that day and sat in the parking lot of a Sobeys and cried for about 15 minutes, then pulled myself together and went back to work. I called every client with outstanding receivables. I sent formal notices, followed up personally, set up payment plans where I had to. I recovered nearly $80,000 in receivables over 4 months. I renegotiated supplier terms, extended payment timelines, consolidated orders to get better pricing. I set up QuickBooks, uploaded 3 years of historical data, and got us compliant with CRA. That process alone took 6 weeks of evenings and weekends. I cut my own pay by 30% and didn't tell anyone. The 6 warehouse guys, my dad's guys, I kept every single one of them on. One of them, a quiet Jamaican-Canadian man who'd been with Dad for 11 years, pulled me aside one afternoon and said, "Your dad would be proud." I had to go into the back and pretend I was checking inventory. Through all of this, my brother was present. He came to the funeral. He came to one family dinner where we briefly discussed what to do about the business. He said he thought we should probably sell. I said I needed more time to assess. He nodded and went back to his life. He didn't ask about the books. He didn't ask about the lease. He didn't ask about the CRA letters. He assumed I was just keeping things afloat in some vague, low-stakes way. The way he'd always assumed I existed in some vague, low-stakes way. I was 31 when I moved back into the family house. The house our parents had bought in Oakville in the 90s. The one we grew up in. The one that still had Dad's reading chair in the corner of the living room. I moved back because the commute to the warehouse was easier from there, and because my apartment lease was up, and because, honestly, it made financial sense to redirect that rent money into the business. My brother had his own house by then. His wife had always been polite to me in a slightly distant way. The kind of polite that means she'd never actually thought much about me one way or the other. My sister-in-law didn't like that I lived in the house. She'd made comments here and there over the years, little things. Once, at a Christmas dinner, she said something about how it must be nice to have your expenses covered while their household was managing a mortgage. I didn't respond. My brother laughed it off. I was paying the mortgage on the family house. Not officially. The mortgage was in Dad's name, then transferred to both of us as co-inheritors, with my brother listed first as the older sibling. But I was making the monthly payments. I'd set up the pre-authorized debit myself, out of a joint account I managed. My brother's contribution was supposed to be deposited monthly. It came in for the first 3 months after Dad passed, then became irregular, then stopped entirely by month 7. His mortgage on his own house, he said. Things were tight. I said okay. I kept paying. He didn't think about who was covering it. I don't think it occurred to him to think about it. This is the part that I still find hardest to explain. Not the money, not the labor, but the fact that I genuinely didn't expect anything in return at the time. I just needed things to not collapse. Dad had built something real. 6 people had jobs because of that business. The house was the house we grew up in. I wasn't doing it to be noble. I was doing it because someone had to, and I was the one who was there, and I'd been the one who was always there. At some point, that became the problem. My sister-in-law started spending more time at the family house over the past year or so. Her parents were in Scarborough, and she visited them often, and the Oakville house became a stopping point. Then it became a more regular thing. She and my brother started talking about what to do with the house long term. I heard these conversations in fragments: selling, renovating first and then selling, using the equity. I asked my brother directly one evening. We were standing in the kitchen. He was eating leftover pasta I'd made. I asked him what he was thinking about the house. He said they were exploring options. I asked if I was going to be part of that conversation. He said, of course, in the way people say of course, when they mean I hadn't really thought about it. The conversation I hadn't been part of turned out to be quite detailed. On a Thursday evening in late February, my brother called me into the living room like he had something important to say. His wife was there. She was sitting very straight, which I recognized as her being prepared for something. My brother sat down and said that they'd decided the house should be sold, that it made more financial sense to liquidate the asset and split the proceeds, and that they'd appreciate it if I started looking for alternative accommodation. He said, alternative accommodation. I remember that specifically. I asked about the business. He said the business was separate. I asked about the mortgage. He said the mortgage would be handled through the sale. I asked him, calmly I think, though my chest felt like it was collapsing, if he understood what I'd been doing for the past 14 months. He said he appreciated that I'd kept things running at the warehouse. His wife said something about how I should be grateful for the time I'd had to figure things out. That's when he said it. Look, you're 31 years old. You've been living here. We've been covering the bills. The business has been. I don't know. You've been doing whatever you've been doing there. But we need to move forward. You can't just keep depending on us indefinitely. It's not fair to us. We've been covering the bills. I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about the 14 months. I thought about Anne, the accountant, and the lease renegotiation, and the 80,000 in recovered receivables, and the CRA, and the payroll, and the warehouse guys, and the 30% pay cut I'd given myself. I thought about the mortgage payments I'd been making every single month automatically, from an account he had full access to view if he'd ever once looked. I said, okay. He seemed slightly surprised. I think he'd expected more pushback. I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed for a while. Then I opened my laptop and I did 4 things. The first thing I did was send an email to Anne. I asked her to prepare a full financial summary of the business for the past 14 months. Revenue, expenses, my personal contributions including the pay reduction, all of it. I asked her to also pull together documentation of every mortgage payment made since Dad passed, with source account details clearly noted. The second thing I did was call our Dad's lawyer, the same one who'd handled the estate, a calm older man in Burlington. And I asked him about my legal standing as a co-inheritor and a co-operator of the business. He told me several things that my brother either didn't know or had assumed wouldn't matter. The third thing I did was email the 6 warehouse guys. I told them I was stepping back from day-to-day operations and that I wanted to have a team meeting within the week. I didn't say anything alarming. I just said we needed to talk. The fourth thing I did was book a furnished apartment. There was a decent one available above a dry cleaner on Lakeshore, not glamorous but clean, and close enough to the warehouse that it made sense. A friend of mine had mentioned it a few weeks earlier. I'd filed it away without knowing why. Now I knew why. I moved out the following Saturday, quietly. I packed what was mine, loaded my car, left the house key on the kitchen counter. I did not take the groceries I'd bought that week. I left them in the fridge. I left a note on the counter that said my forwarding address in case any mail came for me. I didn't say goodbye. My brother wasn't home. His wife was there, and she watched me load the car from the front window. She didn't come outside. What happened next? I didn't orchestrate. I want to be clear about that. I didn't make a plan to blow everything up. I made a plan to protect myself and to be honest about what had actually been happening, and then things proceeded according to what was true. Anne sent the financial summary within the week. It was thorough, and it was damning. Not because anyone had done anything criminal, but because the numbers told a story my brother had been completely oblivious to. My personal contributions to keeping that business operational, the recovered receivables, the restructured lease, the HST remediation, my reduced salary over 14 months, came to just over $230,000 when everything was accounted for. $230,000. The mortgage payments, documented clearly, showed that I had made every single payment for the past 14 months, totaling just over $38,000, from an account that was technically joint. My brother had made 3 payments in the first 3 months after Dad passed. That was it. Our dad's lawyer sent a formal letter to my brother's lawyer, not threatening, not aggressive, just clarifying that as a co-inheritor and co-operator, I had legal standing in both the property and the business. Clarifying that any decisions about selling the house or restructuring the business would need my participation and my agreement. Clarifying that there was a documented financial record of my contributions which would be relevant to any division of assets. My brother called me. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. I let that go to voicemail too. His wife called from her number. Voicemail. He texted. Several texts. The first ones were frustrated. "We need to talk. This is unnecessary. Can you just call me back?" Then they shifted. By the second day they were different in tone, less certain. He said he hadn't realized the full extent of what I'd been managing. He said he thought things had more or less sorted themselves out after Dad passed. He said he'd like to sit down and go through things properly. I counted the messages before I responded. There were 26. I waited 3 days. Then I replied by email, not text, email, so everything was in writing, and I said I was open to a conversation with both of our lawyers present. I said I hoped we could resolve things in a way that was fair to both of us. I kept it short. I kept it polite. I signed off with my first name. The meeting happened about 3 weeks later, in the Burlington lawyers' boardroom. My brother came with his wife and their lawyer. I came with Anne and our dad's lawyer, who had formally taken on my side of things. My brother looked tired. He'd lost some weight since February. His wife sat next to him and didn't look directly at me for most of the meeting. I won't walk through every detail of what was negotiated, because some of it is still technically in process, and because honestly it doesn't matter that much. What matters is the broad strokes. The house is not being sold on anyone's rushed timeline. The decision requires both of us, and I am not in a rush. My brother's plan to liquidate quickly and split the equity, a plan he'd made entirely without me, has been put on hold indefinitely. The business will be formally restructured so that my operational role, my financial contributions, and my stake are properly documented and protected. Whatever happens to the business going forward, whether we eventually sell it, grow it, or I eventually buy him out, it will happen on paper, with accountants and lawyers, the way it should have been from the beginning. My brother's share of the mortgage arrears, the payments he should have been making for 14 months and wasn't, has been formally acknowledged. How that gets resolved is still being worked out. I'm not in a hurry. I've been in the Lakeshore apartment for almost 4 months now. The dry cleaner downstairs is run by a Vietnamese-Canadian family who start work at 6 in the morning and are incredibly cheerful about it. I've had coffee with the owner twice. There's a good pho place 2 blocks east, a decent grocery store, a walking path along the lake that I use on weekends. I still run the business. I go to the warehouse every morning. The 6 guys are still there. Last month, for the first time in almost 2 years, we turned a clean monthly profit. No deferred expenses, no outstanding CRA flags, no receivables over 60 days. I called Anne and told her. She said, "Your dad would be proud." I told her someone else had already told me that. My brother and I don't talk much. When we do, it's businesslike. He called once, not about the lawyers or the money, just to talk, and I picked up that time. The conversation was awkward and short. He said he hadn't understood what I'd been doing. I said I knew. He said he was sorry. I said okay. I meant it, mostly. Grief does strange things to people. It lets some of us rise to what's needed and lets others drift away from what's uncomfortable. And sometimes the person who drifts doesn't even know they're drifting. I don't think my brother is a bad person. I think he looked at the situation, saw that things seemed to be handled, and decided not to look more closely. I think his wife filled in the gaps with a story that was convenient for them. I think it's easy to believe someone is being carried by you when you've never once checked who's actually doing the carrying. But I also know that being generous with my understanding of what happened doesn't mean I have to keep absorbing the cost of it. I've been thinking a lot lately about something Dad used to say. He said it in Punjabi, a phrase his own father used, and it roughly translates to, The person who builds the house should not be the last one let in from the cold. He said it about business, about loyalty, about the people who do the quiet work that no one notices until it stops. I think about those 6 guys in the warehouse. I think about Dad's handshake deals and his sticky note receivables, and the fact that he kept people employed for 20 years on gut instinct and relationships before I got there, and built something that could actually survive him. I think about the mortgage payments coming out automatically every month while my brother ate leftover pasta in that kitchen, and assumed things were just fine. I'm not angry anymore. That surprised me. I expected the anger to last longer. But what settled in its place is something quieter, and I think more permanent. A clarity about what I owe people and what I don't. A clarity about the difference between family and the people in your family who actually show up. Last week I got a letter from CRA. A notice of assessment, clean, no flags, no outstanding issues. I put it on my fridge with a magnet I bought at a gas station in Barry. It's a little lighthouse. I don't know why I kept it. But every morning when I make coffee and look at it, I think, I built something real. It's still standing. And I know exactly how it was built. Even if no one else bothered to look, that's enough.